There were many periods within Star Wars Legends that gave us a wealth of stories, from the ancient history that acted as the background for KOTOR to the gaps between the films themselves. However, one heavily underrated and rarely explored era is the one that set the stage for the state of the Star Wars galaxy in the prequels, the New Sith Wars, which saw an end to wide-scale conflicts between the Jedi and Sith, yet has almost no stories set prior to a century before its end. Instead, most of the events in this era of Star Wars were mentioned either as historical events in stories set afterwards, or through reference books, and what is mentioned seems to be extremely interesting, and in some cases crazy. Firstly, what actually is referenced? Most people likely know the basics of how it ends, with the Brotherhood of Darkness, Ruusan, and Darth Bane. Yet there's much less knowledge on how it started. Around 2000 BBY, another Jedi schism started when an Umbaran Jedi Master left the Jedi Order, who was also initially one of the Lost 20, and later went on to become Darth Ruin, taking at least 50 other Dark Jedi with him when he fell and began the New Sith Wars. However, Ruin didn't last long as the Dark Lord, due to his belief in solipsism, not the last Sith of the era to hold such views, and thus treated his followers awfully, even by Sith standards, and was naturally betrayed. However, he and his forces had done enough to maintain the Sith Order despite those who attempted to fill his place being too busy fighting amongst themselves for power. The next Sith to take power was a rather unusual one, the Dark Underlord, a resurrected Sith spirit of unknown origin which led a group of Sith known as the Black Knights in campaigns across the Outer Rim. Regardless of which era of Sith he originated from, likely an early one such as the Golden Age of the Sith Empire as he chose not to use a lightsaber, he likely had a tomb on the planet Malrev 4 where his forces were based, given how it held a Sith temple that Sidious later visited. In order to defeat him, the Jedi allied themselves with the Mandalorians to fight against the Black Knights. However, immediately after the Underlord was defeated by the Mandalorians, the Jedi Master that had led them against him fell to the dark side and became another Sith Lord, which simply led to a continuation of the conflict. Even the specific faction that the Underlord had led either remained intact throughout the New Sith Wars, or re-emerged later on, with actions taking place even after the New Sith Wars finished, in a skirmish that was later dealt with by Yoda early in his Jedi career. After another large gap of time, with only a trio of battles, all Jedi victories referenced, in references so brief that they were basically name drops, there was a devastating Jedi defeat roughly halfway through the conflict where an already losing battle on the planet of Mizra was turned into a complete disaster when the leading Jedi was killed while using battle meditation, which was such a significant loss that not only did scores of Jedi fall to the dark side, but most of the Outer Rim fell to whatever Sith groups were active at the time. At some point after this shift, Darth Revan was one of the more successful leaders, who created the Sith Battle Lords a few decades after this, which acted as a type of force bond between the Sith Lords and the forces that commanded them in a force-based strategy which saw the Sith either maintain or regain their advantage. However, when his fortress on the planet Almus was found by the Jedi and attacked, he was later propelled to the end of the New Sith Wars by a time-travel-based force storm, where he became stranded on the planet Ruusan, and during one of the battles that was between the Army of Light and Brotherhood of Darkness. Yeah, it's weird. For more details, see a video about time travel in Star Wars. Although not likely the case in the universe, Revan was also the last known Sith before Bane to take on the title of Darth. Now for a Sith mentioned in actual stories. Belia Darzu was a Sith shapeshifter who was referenced in the second book of the Darth Bane trilogy. Just over 250 years before Bane discovered her existence, this Sith took control of the main Sith faction, or created her own, and took a severe approach to the fight against the Jedi. From her fortress on the ruined planet of Tython, she used an ancient Sith variant of the Mechaduru ability in combination with Sith alchemy to create husk-based cyborg abominations called Technobeasts, which became a mechanical version of a zombie outbreak, one that could even affect creatures as large as Jabba's beast from Return of the Jedi, and had few ways of preventing its spread. with one Jedi becoming almost completely overtaken by it aside from his mind, becoming known as the Techno-Beast Jedi. However, instead of being brought down by this Jedi in a form of irony, this situation of the Sith and Belia Darzu herself were brought down by infighting and betrayal, both between Sith and factions that had allied themselves with them. Although there were a small number of Sith that still controlled the Techno-Beasts after this point, the majority that weren't destroyed were left in the Tython fortress to rust until Bane arrived seeking Darzu's Sith holocron, during which he fought his way through almost the entire base worth of Techno-Beasts, with his Orbalisk armour protecting him from the virus. In the final century of the New Sith Wars, the Old Republic all but collapsed in what was known as the Republic Dark Age, as the conflict reached its peak. After centuries of numerous Sith factions chipping away at it, the Old Republic was forced to withdraw its influence from all but the most important planets outside of the core worlds, leaving the Jedi as the main form of order throughout many systems, and leaving others to be abandoned to the Sith entirely. Along with this, the leadership of what remained of the Old Republic was often left in the hands of the Jedi until the War of Light and Darkness, where almost every Supreme Chancellor was also a Jedi. The first storyline to take place in the New Sith Wars was the Knight-Errant comic and novel, exactly 1,000 years before the prequels, and were based around a lone Jedi Knight, each known as Kara Holt, stranded in a sector of space divided between numerous members of a Sith family, with her main opponents being a pair of Sith brothers who were the heirs to the territory and were also warring against each other. One having overly enhanced mental abilities that drove him insane, and the other being a Darth Vader-style Sith so insane that he thought he was a god who had created the entire universe. Unfortunately, after the first of these Sith, Odeon, was defeated, the comic series was cut short due to the establishment of legends. Despite this, there is yet another drought of content between Knight-Errant and Darth Bane Path of Destruction, with most of the lore, even for the major Sith and Jedi leaders in the final years of the New Sith Wars, such as Jedi Lord Hoth and Sith Lord Khan, being limited, with details such as Hoth becoming a Battlemaster and even receiving the title of Lord Hoth, and Khan's fall to the dark side being left to sourcebooks as well. From such sourcebooks, and a few references in Path of Destruction, Khan's version of the Sith traded wins and losses with the Jedi, but still won dozens of battles, and began to make some of the most significant progress in the New Sith Wars. Although ironically, the Brotherhood of Darkness lost the battles for major Sith planets such as Drummond, Kars, and Malrith IV. However, an otherwise obscure planet in the mid-rim of the galaxy, Ruusan, became a key turning point for the New Sith Wars, with neither the Jedi or Sith willing to lose control of it. Although the early battles were fought on smaller scales while several other battles were being actively fought across the galaxy, both Khan and Hoth started to dedicate more and more of their forces to the planet, with each battle escalating to the point where, even if Darth Bane had not chosen to burn the Sith to the ground and start from scratch, the planet would have likely become the place where the New Sith Wars ended. Although there have been those who have pointed out issues with Bane's form of the Sith, the 1,000 years of in-universe history that the New Sith Wars took place in proved that if the Sith were to get anywhere in achieving their goals, they needed to change completely. Something only further reinforced by the remarkable ability for various situations of the Sith Order to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. Meanwhile, the main reason why Bane's Sith fell, alongside Vader's redemption, was the personality of the Sith Lord that finally achieved victory over the Jedi. Even though they disagreed over how to approach it, both Darth Tenebrous and Plagueis had specific plans for how to take over the galaxy, whereas everything Sidious did was ego-driven. Technically, the earliest story to show the New Sith Wars is the comic Prototypes, which acted as an origin story for the bounty hunter Dirge and took place around midway through the conflict in 1500 BBY. However, the conflict itself isn't directly involved or shown in the story, so it's simply a case of the story happening to take place in the time frame. Along with this, the dates provided for the New Sith Wars retroactively means that the Dark Jedi Vulfei Karko from the Quinlan Vos era of the Republic comics was active in this era and likely fought in the New Sith Wars to some extent. given how he was several centuries old at the time of his imprisonment, which took place around 1032 BBY, or 1030 BBY. Although he likely didn't fight as a Jedi for much of it, given how late he started his training. Or alternatively, the specifics of his training and life as a Jedi could have been retconned in some way if Legends had continued for longer. So therefore, the character existing in this time frame was likely an aspect that was not considered by authors of the New Sith Wars era content. So, why do I think this era is underrated? Well, what little information we did get seemed like good starting points for story ideas. Personally, I find the story of Darth Ruin to be extremely interesting, partly because of the way one of the sourcebook writers describes his character, and how his personality and beliefs would have emerged despite such concepts being completely opposed to Jedi values. Along with this, after considering much of the lore that is referenced for the New Sith Wars, it comes across as the pure chaos timeline aspect of Legends and content. With the ways that several Sith fought the Jedi in this era, I think that it would have been the best place in Legends to bring in the form of the true Sith that were being built up in KOTOR 2, as an entire Sith Order's worth of Darth Nihilus type Sith or Dreadmasters, the latter of which felt like the closest Star Wars The Old Republic got to matching the setup of KOTOR 2, and to making it a separate entity to the Galactic Empire replica created by Vitiate in Star Wars The Old Republic, and have the faction essentially gate-crash the new Sith Wars and rampage across the galaxy to the point where the Jedi and new Sith are forced to ally each other to deal with such a threat. Alternatively, have other new Sith factions that are so chaotic that it demonstrates just how much of a detriment on the Force and life itself the dark side is, such as a Sith so mad that they would create hordes of cloned Sith, or a faction that uses the dark side of the Force in every aspect of their war against the Jedi, to the point of directly using specific types of Sith warriors as literal living weapons in space battles, similar to the Star Destroyer feat in Star Wars The Force Unleashed 2. Along with this, as good as the KOTOR games are, and as much as I enjoy SWTOR, the eras of the various Sith Wars are probably the best settings for a action game based around Jedi or Sith with over-the-top Force abilities. Given how close to the end of Legends the Knight Errant series was released, it is at least possible that we could have gotten more content from other eras of the new Sith Wars if the rights for Star Wars had not been sold. However, given how there's no confirmed projects that were cancelled as a result, it's possible that the only stories planned were continuations of the comics plot, and the main source of Old Republic content would remain with the MMO, just like things are in the current state of Star Wars content.